Lords, Your Excellency, and distinguished guests, my name is Zima Sivardin, Chairperson of the Commonwealth Future. It's great to see such a diverse group of people on this virtual meeting today, from honourable parliamentarians, the military, national representatives, and members of non-governmental organisations, to young leaders preparing for the challenge of shaping a better world for the next generation. We have representation from 5 continents throughout the globe. We have some housekeeping rules during this webinar. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but we may not be able to answer all the questions. We have also received many questions in advance by email. Do use the chat function to ask appropriate questions by text only. Please keep muted always. We are recording this session. Thank you. There will be a session for questions and answers following the Right Honourable, the Lord Naseby's presentation. The Commonwealth began as a family of 8 states who signed the London Declaration in 1949. In the intervening years, the Commonwealth has grown to 54 countries, which is more than 1/4 of United Nations member states. Welcome to Mauritius, our latest member. Let me say a few things, of course, about Commonwealth Future, who is hosting this event. Our executive committee are composed of John Bullard, Gareth Griffiths, Michael Mackay, Rudy Page, Graham Robertson, and Kirit Vaidya. Their personal biodata can be seen on our website. Our team of professional advisors are Professor John Marshall, MBE, Professor James Wilson, Professor Kovin Naidu, and Dr. Sui Mei Ho, thought leaders in the eyecare field, representative of all the zones of the Commonwealth. I would like to thank them for all their help in organising this event today. Commonwealth Future is a non-party political organisation which promotes cohesion throughout the 54 Commonwealth countries. Its aims are to promote correctable vision and eyecare throughout the Commonwealth. We all feel that it is important to promote education through reading. This unique event is the first of a series of discussions promoting the importance of eyecare education through reading. We know that the correction of visual issues is a key route to increasing economic and social well-being. Access to and visibility of digital technology is essential for a fairer society. Our vision requires all our loving, tender loving care. It is an amazing sense that we have leaned on during lockdown. It is hard to imagine how lockdown would have been without our vision. We have taken it for granted. In the UK, we have access to adequate spectacles and treatment. We are lucky. But across some countries, there is no consistency. There's a lack of funding, lack of clinical expertise, access to visual aids, and even financial support for those less fortunate. We can make a positive change by giving access to education, access to expertise, and access to optical aids. Education through reading is essential for economic and social well-being, and therefore prosperity. At the Commonwealth Future, we see this as a human right to be able to see the world clearly. Everyone deserves to have the best vision, regardless of your upbringing, class, or country of residence. We have a mission to impact this as much as we can. We hope that we can focus on our combined skills and play a pivotal role You all hold the key if we work together. Together, we can change the lives and vision throughout our Commonwealth. Commonwealth Future has organized this webinar in conversation with the Right Honourable Lord Michael Naseby, PC, due to our immense respect for Lord Naseby as a person. Lord Naseby has had a very distinguished, erudite life, contributing to creating an equitable life for all. He has achieved a great deal from a young age, having played rugby for England schoolboys as a loosehead prop, achieving the accolade of being an RAF pilot, being chosen by the House of Commons as a Deputy Speaker before entering the House of Lords in 1997. We feel we should recognize the contribution he has made during his life to the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth countries. In the heraldic design of his bearer's arms are written the armorial ensigns: Michael Wolfgang Lawrence Baron Naseby, one of Her Majesty's most honourable Privy Council. This webinar is a celebration of his life. We have chosen his book, Sri Lanka, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, in our series of eyecare education through reading, as it has a real insight into a founding member of the Commonwealth, Sri Lanka. It is well researched and interestingly written with such a flow, grace, and some amazing imagery that I really enjoyed reading the book. As you may see and you may know, we have three eminent speakers today in front of us. Her Excellency Serotosurisena, Lord Kirkhope of Harrogate, and the Right Honourable Lord Michael Naseby. I am looking forward to hearing Lord Naseby's account of his book later. Our first speaker, Her Excellency Serotosurisena, Sri Lankan High Commissioner to the UK, was recently appointed in March this year. We're delighted to have Her Excellency join us. Her Excellency Seroja is a graduate of the University of Melbourne and École Nationale d'Administration in France. Before arriving in London, Her Excellency served as the ambassador to Austria, ambassador of Sri Lanka to Austria, with concurrent accreditation to Slovak Republic, Slovenia, Serbia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And she was a permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations and international organizations in Vienna. Her previous posts in Sri Lanka include Director General of Public Communications and spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Director General Economics Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Director General for the External Relations of the Ministry of Economic Development, and Director South Asia and Consular Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's fluent in French, enjoys yoga, cooking, and playing the piano. You can now see why she's serving such an important diplomatic post like the United Kingdom. Let me introduce you to Her Excellency Serotosurisena.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sivardin, for the kind introduction. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and privilege to address this webinar organized by the Commonwealth Future and to be in the company of a distinguished panel. Lord Naseby's long association with Sri Lanka makes him one of the best known, respected, and much loved personalities in the country. It is in testimony of this that he was, in 2005, the recipient of the Sri Lanka Ratna Award, which is the highest honor of the country to be bestowed on a non-national. I am pleased to make the acquaintance of Lord Kirkhope of Harrogate and hope that we can all meet in person in the not so distant future. Given the unprecedented challenges faced by all nations at this particular juncture, I wish to commence by highlighting Sri Lanka's endeavors in combating the COVID-19 pandemic. We had our first case registered in late January and the first local case in March. The Colombo airport was closed on the 18th of March. This measure was taken in order to manage the situation within the country and prevent further cases from coming into Sri Lanka. This was followed by the imposition of an island-wide curfew on the 20th of March, along with the closure of schools and universities. In order to mitigate the immediate difficulties by the closure of airports, which no doubt inconvenienced a large number of Sri Lankans who were either studying, working, or on short-term visits overseas, the government established a web portal to register all Sri Lankans who wished to be repatriated, and then commenced limited repatriation of the most vulnerable sectors, region-wide. All those repatriated have been upon arrival and prior to leaving the quarantine facility. Sri Lanka's COVID-19 cases have just tipped over the 2,000 mark, and the number of recoveries is approximately 1,700. We have not recorded community transmission since the end of April. Almost 3 months, the 3-month-long curfew has now been lifted, and I'm particularly happy to state that schools were reopened today with stringent conditions. The economic impact of the pandemic has been felt across all sectors, with the tourism industry being the most affected. The government has taken several measures to assist vulnerable and low-income groups, and also export sectors. We have also made appeals for a consideration of a debt moratorium in order to mitigate cumulative effects on the economy. I now wish to outline briefly Sri Lanka's role in the Commonwealth. Sri Lanka, as a founding member of the Commonwealth, attaches a great deal of importance to it. Our most recent engagement was to facilitate the regional capacity building workshop in association with the Commonwealth on the prevention of violent extremism through education in the South Asian region in Colombo last year. Sri Lanka supports the Christchurch initiative with partners with the Commonwealth on countering violent extremism, which is a serious threat to the Commonwealth values and international peace, security, human rights, democracy, social harmony, economic and social development. Sri Lanka has dedicated 10 hectares of forest land in the Trincomalee district in honor of the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy Initiative. The project aims to restore the area into natural forests and provide feasible ecosystems for species and deliver benefits to the local communities. We are pleased that the Trincomalee Anuradhapura Highway Restoration Project has been granted the QCC accreditation. Sri Lanka has endorsed the Commonwealth Peace at the Crease initiative launched by the CSG, the Commonwealth Secretary General. Sri Lanka, as a member of the steering committee, was actively engaged with some of the Commonwealth activities to promote this initiative. Unfortunately, some of the activities planned had to be postponed because of the prevailing situation. Sri Lanka's priority areas of sustainable development, protection of the environment, and addressing climate change issues have resonance with initiatives of the Commonwealth. Sri Lanka volunteered to champion a Commonwealth Blue Charter Action Group on mangrove systems, ecosystems, and livelihoods. We already hosted its first successful meeting in Colombo in October 2019, with support of the Commonwealth Secretariat. Sri Lanka is also a member of the Clean Ocean Alliance. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a brief outline of Sri Lanka's Commonwealth engagement. I leave you with that and hope to respond to any questions later. And I think everyone wants to listen to Lord Naseby's account on Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting speech on Sri Lanka, Your Excellency. Our next speaker, who will introduce Lord Naseby is Lord Kirkhope of Harrogate. Lord Kirkhope of Harrogate has served the people of Yorkshire and the Humber since 1987 to 1997 as a Member of Parliament, and served as a Member of the European Parliament for 17 years between 1999 and 2016. During this time, Lord Timothy was a government whip and Home Office Minister. Lord Timothy has known Lord Naseby for many years. Lord Timothy was born and educated in Newcastle upon Tyne and is a qualified solicitor and still holds a practicing certificate. In 1995, as a senior whip, Lord Timothy became Vice Chamberlain of the Royal Household, Her Majesty the Queen's link to the House of Commons. He was involved in many daily communications with Her Majesty regarding events of the House of Commons and personally taking and attending Her Majesty's presence when signing necessary orders. He was elevated to the peerage in 2016 and became Lord Kirkhope of Harrogate. He currently serves on the House of Lords EU Select Subcommittee on Justice and Home Affairs. Recently, as a member of the APPG on General Aviation, Lord Timothy chaired an inquiry into UK lower airspace and is a treasurer of the APPG of Germany. He was a founder member of the House of Commons Classic Car Club, now known as Parliamentary Historic Vehicle Group, and is a member of both the Porsche Owners Club and the Bentley Drivers Club. He's still a qualified pilot, flying light aircraft for the last 35 years. Lord Timothy Kirkhope of Harrogate will now introduce the Right Honourable, the Lord Naseby, PC.
Your Excellency, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's a particular pleasure for me to be able to introduce my old friend and colleague, Lord Naseby, Michael Naseby, and to say a few words about him and about the excellent publication of his book. In doing so, I want to acknowledge first the long-standing friendship between our country and Sri Lanka. And the presence of Her Excellency is wonderful this evening because, of course, as has been said, Sri Lanka was one of the original members of the Commonwealth and has been a great supporter of the work of the Commonwealth all these years. I also want to thank our hosts this evening, Commonwealth Future, particularly for hosting this event, but also for all the hard work they do in terms of developing the Commonwealth and protecting the Commonwealth in areas such as the question of vision and eyesight. It's interesting that we should be discussing the publication of a book tonight, which of course is very important from the point of view of training the eyes, maintaining eyes, and also educating. And I'm therefore delighted that they have been hosting us this evening and will be hosting the discussions that take place next. When I first entered the House of Commons in 1987, one of the first people I met in an area of the House of Commons with desks and members present, known as the cloisters, was none other than Lord Naseby, then Michael Morris, MP. He was already a distinguished Member of Parliament, having been in the House of Commons since 1974. So I was a bit of a late entrant, coming in 13 years after that. But he, in close proximity to me, was very, very helpful in guiding me in certainly the processes of the House of Commons, but also in certain wise words that he deployed towards me. And one of the things that I think we both agreed with then and agree with now is that politicians are people preferably who have something else in their lives than just being politicians. He had had a distinguished career, not only in terms of business, also in the wide nature of where he had worked in the world, which of course brought him into contact with Sri Lanka way back in 1963. And his passion for Sri Lanka and looking after the interests of Sri Lanka, caring about Sri Lanka, has gone on ever since. I came from a lawyer's background, but it is important for politicians to have other interests. You mentioned classic cars. Well, I think it's fair to say that at that time, Michael also had a certain interest in motor cars. He and I both had an interest in aviation, and it's something which I know our interest has continued. But he went on to very grand things and was already doing grand things by becoming a member not only originally of the Speaker's panel, that is chairing committees in the House of Commons on important bills, but then subsequently as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which effectively is the #2 spot to the Speaker as a Deputy Speaker of the House. And both of us left Parliament, left the House of Commons in 1997. He went to the Lords and has had a distinguished career in the Lords ever since. And I hopped across the channel to Brussels, where I became a member of the European Parliament, as has been said, and remained there for 17 years. I didn't see a lot of Michael during those 17 years, but I certainly read about him and the work that he did in the House of Lords. So it was the greatest of pleasure for me to come back when I was appointed to the House of Lords by David Cameron in 2016, and to meet, almost first meeting I had in the corridor was Michael. And it almost seemed as if it had been yesterday. We again were able to compare notes and to talk about the things that mattered. And may I just say a word or two about him and his book, because his passion for Sri Lanka should not be underestimated. But a book like this that is being published, setting out his feelings for Sri Lanka and the background, is a very comprehensive book. It's something which everybody should read who has an interest in Sri Lanka. It's not just written by a chance reporter. It's written by someone who feels for the subject in a unique way. Michael, I'm pretty convinced he might well be going to write some more. I hope he might, but maybe for the moment we should rest on this and allow Michael to talk to us. This book is really worth it. It's published by Unicorn Publishing. It is a wonderful title as well, The Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, which no doubt Michael is going to tell us the reasons for that title. And I am terribly touched and delighted to have been asked by you this evening to have said a few words at this point about a good friend and colleague, and someone who I think sets down all the most important principles behind being a representative of the people, being a loyal and devoted servant of the country, but also concerned for the world, the wider world, as he is. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, Your Excellency, friends, thank you so much for putting this evening's webinar on. I was born in the reign of Edward VIII. He only served for 9 months, so you can work out from that I must be around 83 and a bit. That is 1936. I suppose the first big event in my life was to be bombed out of London by the Blitz and sent down to Herefordshire with a gas mask and a label around me to a farm in that part of England on the Welsh borders. So in a sense, for the next 18 months, I was a refugee, and it certainly made me think about the conditions that other refugees have had, and we've had some experiences in Sri Lanka on that front. Interestingly, I picked up my old stamp album in preparation for this. There are no less than 3 pages of stamps of Ceylon, going back to Edward VII stamps, and I looked them out, and there they are. And why did I collect stamps on Ceylon? I don't know. But at any rate, it was a foreportent of the future. At my school, I was very lucky. I went to Bedford School, a wonderful school. And by sheer coincidence again, I shared a study in the sixth form with a man called Kit Srinivasan, who later became the Foreign Secretary of India. So 2 years together, something must have sparked, mustn't it? As Zima said, I played rugby for the English schoolboys, managed to just pass the A-levels. But amazingly, my father, who was a sort of nomadic architect, got a job in Lahore. So I went to see him in the summer of 1955. And he said, well, there's a scheme whereby the children of officials can learn to fly. I've signed you up. So I said, wonderful, Father. So I went up to the airport at Lahore, and after some 4 hours in an oyster eaglet, went solo, and then went solo in a Cessna. I still remember the navigation trip. Taking off from Lahore, refueling at Peshawar, going down the Afghan border, and looking at the dreadful scenery below me on the right, arriving at Karachi airport, holding pattern, told by the control tower, as soon as you see that international airliner landing, you should make your approach. Look, Michael Naseby. Fine. And so that was quite an experience. And after that, well, I went to Cambridge. I went to do my national service. Obviously, tried to get into the Air Force, was successful. Then went to Canada. Another experience of the 10 then members of NATO, all of whom had sent young men to learn to fly. I became a pilot, got my license and everything, then went to Cambridge, read economics. But again, a sheer chance, a man called Walter Rostow, a professor, came over and talked about the stages of growth, particularly in the developing countries. How was I to know? But that really was a key to me, because I thought to myself, well, what job am I going to do? I hadn't got any money. I'd fallen in love with a young lady, and now I'm still married to her with 60 years coming up. And so I said to my wife, I think we better go abroad. You get paid there and you get free accommodation. So I joined Reckitt and Coleman overseas, said I'd like to go to the Indian subcontinent. And they said, wonderful, you go to Calcutta. I wasn't sure that was quite such a good idea. Anyway, I went to Calcutta, and that was I was officially assistant sales manager, Eastern India, looking after Bihar, Orissa, West Bengal, and United Provinces. Learned Hindustani up to O-level. And there's one little story up there. I went up to a place called Murray on the Nepal border where they had an agricultural show. Things went well, and they presented me with a present, a small elephant. Well, you imagine, here am I. I thought, what do I do with an elephant? I don't want to upset anybody. So something, and we had to do a little deal in the end. And I said, oh, well, would you have any fur for my wife in lieu of the elephant? And they gave me a fox fur. And my wife still has this wonderful fox fur. Came back, and then in May the 10th, 1963, I'm summoned to the Borough Sahib's office. I thought, what have I done wrong? He had a big smile on his face, so obviously I hadn't done anything wrong. He said, we're promoting you, increasing your salary, but you've got to be in Colombo on Friday with Anne, my wife, the baby, and the dog. So we went down there on the 14th of May and arrived, stayed in the Gaulface, and I took over the marketing there. And I was the acting Borough Sahib because the Borough Sahib was on furlough. I took that island, that beautiful island, and I did 3 major tours in the 7 months that I was there. And I may, if I may, just one short quotation from my book, which is the afternoon of part of this tour was dedicated to culture, as we wanted to see the ruins of Polonnaruwa. I walked round with a local guide who spoke good English. It was he who pointed out my first cobra, fast asleep on a wall in the sunshine. My guide poked him with a long stick, and just like a trained circus animal, neck shot up with fangs displayed ready to strike. We moved on and gave him a clear berth. Well, all I can say is the other wonderful experience of that period was meeting a man called Ananda Dattista Alvis. At that time, running J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, like came good tennis with me. My wife went home because I was near the end of my tour. He told me he was standing for Parliament, which he did. He later became Speaker. And of course, as Timothy just said, I became Deputy Speaker. So a wonderful, truly wonderful introduction. However, 10 years it took me to pick up the reins because I wanted to get to Parliament. I did a lot of politics. And it took me till 1974 to win an election in Northampton South by just 179 votes. I started the all-party group for Sri Lanka. I asked Betty Boothroyd if she'd be, who was one of the few Labour people I knew, if she'd be my vice chairman. She agreed, and we became lifelong friends. What do I remember of those early days as chairman? I do remember Mrs. Bandanarka's period was difficult for the country, rise of the JVP, etc. But in London, I talked with Sir George Correa, who was the High Commissioner, about getting some aid from Doris Hart, the Labour lady, who was in charge of aid. And she agreed to do the Victoria Dam. And we then had a change of presidency. J.R. Wardner came in, and he, of course, was a joy to work with. He used to quote Shakespeare, far better than I ever knew Shakespeare. I remember, too, that when we had trouble in the Falkland Islands in 1982, our then Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, said, could you ring the President of Sri Lanka and see if you could get them to vote for us? Well, thankfully, yes, they did vote for us. And let's not forget, Your Excellency, you were just only one of 7 countries that voted for us at that time. Then, of course, we had Black Friday and the tragedy of the 11 soldiers and the rioting and all the difficulties that thrown up. But then some joy later on, because Mrs. T opens that dam, Victoria Dam, on the 12th of April 1985. And I felt that I'd done something to ensure that the money for that got there. The other things I remember in that early in the period as it developed forward, the Indian Intrusion 1987. I don't know what would have happened if India had not intruded. I think the LTTE would have probably, it was surrounded at the time, would probably, hopefully have surrendered. Who knows? 2004, the tsunami, Anne and I flew out as quickly as we could do to help. And I believe, and you see it in the book, I believe we really did help at that period, which is why you very kindly gave me the award of the Sri Lanka Ratna. The other 2 things I remember, particularly Freedom of Information Act. You had the war, particularly from Jan 1 to May 18, and we had a man on the ground, a military attaché. He thought, so he must have sent notices back, and he did do. But it took me 2 years and a bit to get those dispatches, and even then they are a bit redacted. But nevertheless, I'm always reminded of the words of Mahatma Gandhi. And if you remember them with me, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And that's what Sri Lanka is going to do in relation to the challenges it faces now. I believe I can play a small part in trying to ensure that that wonderful country, lovely people, and has so much talent, can be allowed to develop as it should develop as a really important member of the Commonwealth. Thank you all so much. Over to you, Zima.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, Lord Naseby. Actually, as you mentioned, Baroness Betty Boothroyd wrote a beautiful foreword for the book, and I've got her signature. I'm privileged enough to have a signature on your book with yourself as well. Thank you. We can now lead on into the question and answer session. If it is fine by you, I will simply ask the questions submitted without its author. Lord Naseby, what was the motivation for you to write this book purely on Sri Lanka, other than those points you mentioned? Because, you know, you've got quite a wide range of experiences. You could have done it on United Kingdom, for example.
I think the real motivation was during the winter, when I went down to the cellar to see just how many files I had on Sri Lanka. And I thought, I must do something with this. And I delved into them and I sorted out the boxes into years, and then thought to myself, I'll do an outline. And then I asked friends in the House of Lords, anybody know any publishers? And thankfully, at the end, one Lord Baker says, yeah, I know a publisher. I've looked at your outline. It's interesting. I'll make a phone call. So he made a phone call, and lo and behold, that phone call was to the publisher of the book, who said, yeah. So yeah, that's what it was all about, really.
That's really interesting. Thank you. You have been exposed to many heads of states in the UK and Sri Lanka during your lifetime, both in the United Kingdom and in Sri Lanka. We're curious to know which leaders have made an impression on you and why.
Well, in the UK, I would say two, really. I think Margaret Thatcher. I had the privilege of being the unofficial PPS to Eri Neave, who was her very close advisor until he was killed by the IRA. And I certainly admired her enormously. It may surprise some people. I also admired Tony Blair, because I think we needed, as a country, a bit of a shake-up when he took over as well. In your own dear country, I think in particular two, I think JR, until he made that terrible mistake of not bringing in the curfew on the rioting, had did a lot to bring forward Sri Lanka as a good economy and trying to find a way through. And I think currently, not the current president, but his brother who was president, you know, was, he took decisions, and that's so important in life. So, but all of them, quite frankly, in Sri Lanka have tried hard in difficult circumstances.
Thank you for that. It's really good to gain your insight from all your experiences. Just to emphasize, Commonwealth Future is not a party political organization. Lord Naseby, in your book, you allude to many political references, as you just mentioned. Some questions arise relating to reconciliation, an important goal and a huge challenge. Social harmony is for us the summum bonum, the greatest good. Anything that undermines this sought after good should be avoided. May I ask you what your assessment of the time frame to achieve reconciliation?
I would say, Zimar, that you can't really put a time frame on it, other than it is the #1 issue facing Sri Lanka. You have another, 14 different ethnic groups, 2 major religions, and yet when I read about the lotus flower and the way it survives overnight, it goes into the depths of the mud and all that turmoil there, and yet comes up as a beautiful flower every day. I look upon that as my catalyst. And I think the time has come now when people will recognize needs a lot of work, a lot of patience. And one thing you learn in politics, if you're sitting in the chair, is patience. To just take it forward gently and believe and understand that people have strong views, but gradually they come together. So I am optimistic. I think we can find. Now we have a wonderful opportunity, and I'll play a small role in it. After all, I have worked in Canada as well, and there's well over 1 million Sri Lankans in Canada. So we'll see. But I think there is a chance now, Zimar.
That's great. Thank you for that, Lord Naseby. You mentioned in your book that it was in Sri Lanka that you were inspired to become a politician. I would be grateful if you could kindly elaborate on this. And could you also expand on the difference in politics in Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom, where you are an expert?
Well, I think it's entirely due to, as I said earlier, an anecdotis ad alvis, because my wife Anne and the baby had gone home. I had 7 weeks. So apart from playing tennis, he very kindly offered me supper because his mother cooked. And we talked politics because he was standing for Parliament. And we did it from a marketing point of view. And that is why he was successful. So from a marketing point of view, you've got to listen to everybody. You've got to provide leadership. You've got to have a strategy. And I got home, and then ironically, my wife invites to dinner for the first evening the gentleman who was running the campaign for the London elections, the Greater London elections. And he says, well, what are you doing? You've got furlough for 2 months. I said, I'm not doing anything other than looking after the baby. So he said, okay, well, come and help. And I did. And of course, then once you start that, then it goes there. Politics, different. Well, funnily enough, I think it's more in the blood of Sri Lankans. I mean, after you've been a colony, or like any colony, you look for leadership, and you provided that leadership. And it's very precious, I imagine, to have gone through a position of where you were a colony, and you then become an independent state. So that degree of independence is absolutely in the blood of the people who were right at the forefront then, and within the families that were involved. And the challenges there require people to be dedicated to the cause. And I see that. I mean, I see it in the varying families within, whether it's the Bandanakas or the Rajapaksas or the Jawadnas. These are all political families. So we don't quite have the same in the UK. I think we have some families, obviously, but not to the same degree.
Thank you, Lord Naseby. Just going back to your experience as a loosehead prop, Lord Naseby, what do you think is the difference in the game between the United Kingdom and Sri Lanka in style and techniques?
Well, I think firstly, the ground is usually a lot harder in Sri Lanka, because I played a couple of games. We never had, and we used to have longer grass too. And secondly, it's very hot in Sri Lanka to play rugby, even in the cooler season. I think having said that, your chaps are very quick off the mark. You're almost all of them are sprinters. And on the whole, it was only the backs in the UK that were.
Thank you. I mean, as you know, I played rugby as well as a prop, and also our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was a tight head prop as well. So that's very interesting. Do you enjoy listening to international music? What music do you like to listen to? And did you listen to any music while writing your book, Lord Naseby?
Yes, well, a short guidance from people. They said, well, you should shut yourself away. Well, that I did. I told Anne that from 8:30 till 12:30, I was not to be disturbed. But the advice was mixed. You could either have an absolute silence or some music. I decided I would have music. And I had background opera music and that type of classical music. And I found that inspired me. So yeah, I enjoyed having music. I still do. Most evenings I will have some music, some lighter than the others, but quite often opera music.
Do you enjoy listening to international music from the Indian subcontinent, Lord Naseby?
Well, no, not really. It's not that I don't enjoy it. It's basically that I haven't got any discs on it. So if anybody knows of a really good mixture of Sri Lankan music, High Commissioner, I'd love to receive a disc for my birthday on November the 25th.
I'm sure one of us will do that for you, Lord Naseby. I'm sure we can sort that out for you. This is an interesting question from one of the audience, Lord Naseby. There are many references to some beautiful poetry from the English poet John Milton, as Lord Kirkhope also mentioned with the title of your wonderful book. When and where did you first discover the poet John Milton, and what fascinated you about his poems?
I discovered John Milton when I was in the 6th form, reading A-level English under a man called John Eyre, who was a socialist. And he, in a sense, began to make me think about Milton's poems and also the background to that poetry. And the background is our civil war and the fight between Parliament and the King. And because he was a socialist, he was on Parliament's side. And the more I thought about it, and I've begun to think about Parliament a little bit, I thought, yes. And then when I come to write the book and I read the poems again, that's where Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained come from. And of course, when I had to take a new name, because there were 5 other Morrises already in the Lords, I looked at my parliamentary seat of Northampton. All the wounded from the Battle of Naseby, which was the turning point of the Civil War, came into my constituency. The parliamentary people went into one church and the Royalists went into another. And having discovered all that, yes, Milton had to be quoted.
That's really interesting, Lord Naseby. Thanks for clarifying that. You know, this question and answer session has been very interesting. And thank you for all participating in the questions. There are many references to a whole wide range of very interesting areas. And I certainly recommend, having read it, to read a bit more and look further into the book, ladies and gentlemen. May I ask some questions to Her Excellency Serotosurisena? We've got a few more minutes before I hand over to Graham Robertson. Your Excellency, you mentioned about how you manage the Sri Lankan government and yourself being a representative, manage COVID-19 during this pandemic. And you mentioned how the country mitigated the risks very beautifully. And congratulations to Sri Lanka on maintaining a very low level of deaths. And it's really tremendous achievement by Sri Lanka. Congratulations. May I ask you, Your Excellency, how has Sri Lanka adapted its education and health system to help support the rise in poor eyesight in South Asia?
Well, firstly, I think we're trying our best in COVID. I mean, it's it's still work in progress. But we have been very fortunate that our administrative services, the military and the health services have come together to assist in the best we can to mitigate the detrimental effects of COVID-19. On the education system, perhaps I'll just give you a little bit of a background that Sri Lanka maintains despite its difficult, throughout its difficult economic times. We have maintained a free health and education system that is provided by the state. So there is universal access to education and healthcare. This is, I think it's very important in particularly dealing with crisis situations. We saw this throughout the time of the terrorist conflict, through the tsunami, and even now, that people that are aware, people that have access to basic facilities and education and health cope better when they are going through crises. On eye care, one thing I'd like to highlight at this is Sri Lanka is one of the largest donors of Cornea. I mean, this has been, we have the Akshadan, the eye donation society, which was an independent society established. And we have been exporting Cornea to the world. In terms of having free eye care in Sri Lanka, we have the hospitals that people have access to, so as part of the national health system. So eye care is part of the free health services offered by the government to the public. So this is part of our free healthcare. I think, did I answer using?
That's wonderful, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for mentioning the Sri Lankan eye donation unit, which I was privileged to be a clinical advisor for 2 years. They're doing a wonderful job spreading and making a difference in people's lives. Thank you for that. So thank you. There have been a great number of questions submitted. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all of them. It has been very fruitful question and answer session with Lord Naseby and Her Excellency. Thank you all for your participation. Graham Robertson, one of our international ambassadors for Commonwealth Future, will now conclude the session. Graham.
Good evening, Your Excellency, Lords and distinguished guests. I made a few notes before we started, and I'm going to deviate on the first sentence because I think tonight we've all been on so many Zoom calls over the last few months, but rarely have we experienced something that we have shared tonight, and that's magical moments and magical insights that I don't know where we would have got that anywhere else. So let me just thank all the speakers, Your Excellency, Lord Kirkhope and Lord Naseby. You have all given us a little bit of magic tonight on a Zoom call, which has been very different, I'm sure, for all the participants. I want to talk a little bit about our future events and how you can maybe support us. So basically, we're trying to organize a series of activities and events. We popped into Sri Lanka, and we hope to jump around some of our Commonwealth friends and get more insights from each of the different Commonwealth countries. And as Zimar said, we're keen to emphasize, this key route to create a fair and prosperous society is to improve one's sight in order to read, work, educate, and enjoy a truly prosperous life. Our focus this year in eye care education through reading, we've had a bit of a focus in Ghana and in Jamaica. And we're really pleased our executive committee have already identified some local partners in those countries to engage with young people. So we've engaged with Knutsford University College, Accra, Ghana, and also the St. Andrews Football Association in Kingston, Jamaica. And we're all engaging with groups as well across the UK, in Eswatini, in South Africa, and in Uganda. We've got some speakers coming up. We want to combine a look at Commonwealth countries and some of those insights, but we also want to bring you innovational insights. So we have a speaker, Professor Frank Epagesi, who is co-founder of iTools, and he's going to be looking and discussing the art and practice of eye care throughout the Commonwealth and some of those countries. And we hope to have his presentation in the not too distant future. We'll also be hearing from Sir Anthony Selden, Vice Chancellor of the University of Buckingham, with Professor James Arthur, also of the University of Buckingham, who have co-written a book, Educating for a Characterful Society. And that's with a lot of other highly distinguished co-authors, all from the House of Lords, Baroness Nicky Morgan, Dame Julia Cleverdon, and Lord James O'Shaughnessy. So if any of you have heard Sir Anthony speak before, or for those of you who haven't, that's one you don't want to miss. He is a wonderful speaker, and we really enjoyed having him in the past. So we don't totally know when these will be due to the current situation. We hope to have one of our forthcoming events in the House of Lords, and it would be a real pleasure to meet you all in person. If I can ask you to continue to look at our website for further details, and I hope you don't mind us contacting you closer to these events. There are no fixed dates yet, but we're hoping that the next one will be August, September. A little request here. As I said, following today's webinar, we want to engage as many Commonwealth country members as possible. And it would also be good to have an event like today's. And I think what the lockdown has shown us with the Zoom calls and Microsoft Team type calls, we can get a lot of people on from all around the world at various different times, which we sometimes can't do in a meeting. So where you can possibly help us, a lot of you on the call today will have wonderful connections, I'm sure. And one of our goals is to have a Commonwealth Future chapter each Commonwealth country. So if any of you know people that don't have a political agenda, that want to be part of Commonwealth Future, and that might be interested in participating in a local international chapter, we'd love to hear from you, hear from them directly. And Michael will put our contact details up on the screen shortly. Lord Naseby, thank you again. Just a quick reminder for those of you, his book is available in all independent bookstores, Waterstones, Amazon, and Unicorn Publishing, and other bookstores are available, of course. If you're looking for author, you need to look for Michael Naseby, not Lord Naseby. So look up Michael Naseby for the author there. In wrapping up, thank you all so much for attending this evening and giving up your time. I look forward to the next webinar, but also to meeting all of you in person, and any support would be greatly welcome. We'll leave the contact details slide on the screen for the next 15 seconds or so you can jot down email addresses, and we look forward to hearing from you. So we will terminate the session now, apart from that slide. Thank you so much and good evening.